Rising high above the surrounding valleys, the Smoky Mountains transform the landscape into a natural wonder. Since they can be seen miles away in Knoxville, Asheville, and other cities, the entire region is exposed to their greatness. These mountain ranges inspire their visitors to wander, escape, and dream. They offer the intangibles you can't find anywhere else on Earth: the simple yet majestic views, the diverse ecosystems, all pieces of the puzzle combined to form a place worth protecting at any cost. The Smoky Mountains tell the story of the people who have inhabited the region for hundreds of years. From early Native Americans to the Cherokee, to the European settlers who modernized the region into what it is today, many cultures and histories have experienced these mountains, but the mountains have stayed the same. They continue to shine over the lands like beacons of hope and aspiration. Throughout the Smoky Mountains, there are countless locations that embody those Smoky Mountains. One of these locations is Mount LeConte. Mount LeConte has been, and still is, a critical chapter of the Smoky Mountains story. At 6,595 feet, Mount LeConte is the third highest peak in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and serves continuously as a proper welcome to the national park. On top of Mount LeConte stands the LeConte Lodge, providing visitors with rooms, meals, and a window into the soul of the Smoky Mountains. In 1925, Mount LeConte Lodge was permanently established by the Great Smoky Mountains Conservation Association and Paul Adams. Originally used as an accommodation for national dignitaries to convince them of the park's value to the nation, LeConte Lodge has since become a highly sought-after mini-vacation destination. With a capacity of 60 guests per night, LeConte Lodge is one of a handful of places you can sleep in a permanent structure on a protected mountaintop in the entire United States. Mount LeConte, like many natural locales in the world, wasn't always inhabited by modern Americans. The recorded history of humans in the area dates back to the original Spanish explorers of the New World and to the Cherokee who had already been living there for some time. The Cherokee overlapped this time of exploration as the Smoky Mountains were their home for hundreds of years before European settlement. Their name for Mount LeConte was Wallacee. Once the early European settlers came in, they renamed the mountains Bullhead. Eventually, modern science gave Mount LeConte the name it still holds today. To handle the political side of creating a new national park, the Great Smoky Mountains Conservation Association was created. This commission needed to find a way to convince the political elites that a national park would not only protect the area, but benefit the country as a whole. To accomplish that task, the Great Smoky Mountains Conservation Commission decided to take these important dignitaries on an adventure to the top of Mount LeConte to show them why this place was so special. This led to the unofficial creation of LeConte Lodge when the first trip was made in 1924 to the top of the mountain to stay overnight. Paul Adams was a young Knoxvillian chosen by the GSMCA to become the first manager of LeConte Lodge. In 1925, he received permission to establish the first structures of LeConte Lodge. At the time Paul Adams took over LeConte Lodge, the idea of providing lodging in the middle of a remote forest was ridiculous. There was no such thing in existence, at least in America, at the time. Because the motive behind the lodge was to wine and dine dignitaries, the original accommodations of LeConte Lodge were extremely luxurious, even for the time period. The early guests didn't have to carry any gear with them, or anything else really. They simply had to make the hike up to the top, and everything else would be provided for them. Paul Adams was responsible for the early direction of LeConte Lodge. He came up with the idea of communal meals and communal sleeping arrangements. He erected massive canvas tents to house guests. He even allowed these housing tents to be co-ed, which was unheard of during the early 20th century. Adams and his staff cooked every meal family style and over a fire for those on the trip. He was famous for greeting guests as they arrived with coffee and other drinks, a tradition that continues today. During the lodge's first off-season, from the end of November 1925 to the end of March 1926, Adams built the first permanent structure for LeConte Lodge. A basic one-room cabin filled with bunk beds would be the first official structure of LeConte Lodge. The second manager of LeConte Lodge was Jack Huff, who operated the lodge from 1926 to 1959. He is responsible for the majority of the current structures built on Mount LeConte and is colloquially known as the father of LeConte Lodge. Built by Huff, but no longer standing, was an improved version of Adam's first cabin. Huff built the new cabin with timber from the forest, local moss, and clay to cover the floor. However, a different cabin built by Huff in 1934 still stands today and is known as the Old Lodge. As time went on, the popularity of the lodge increased exponentially. Huff needed much more space than he currently had, so he built 7 more cabins and a large main lodge. This led to the stoppage of the original communal design of the lodge, as it took on a more individualistic approach to accommodations. Additionally, meals were no longer cooked over the fire, but now prepared in a kitchen and eaten at a table. By the 1940s and 50s, lodge operators had created a lawn for the lodge, but eventually let it grow over to allow the mountain to remain as natural as possible. Perhaps the most significant event that occurred during Jack Huff's tenure was finding the Basin Spring, a spring near the lodge. Rarely are there ever springs found at such a high elevation, but the mountains always provide, and they have provided this spring to the lodge for fresh water ever since. The Browns purchased the lodge from the Huffs in 1960 and managed it until 1975. The Browns were ready to change things up at the lodge, as the lodge had become stagnant in the final years of the Huffs' tenure. Unknown to the Browns at the time of purchase, however, was the political machine's attempt to erase the lodge in the near future. The Wilderness Act of 1964 hit them before they knew it. By the law of the act, any human development in areas deemed as wilderness areas were to be permanently erased and destroyed. With the potentiality of most of the national park becoming wilderness area, the act threatened to end LeConte Lodge forever. Fortunately, the court system ran just as slow back then as it does now, so the Browns went full steam ahead to improve the lodge in the meantime. The Browns built a water tank for a proposed new water system, more lodging, a septic tank, and flush toilets within their time as managers. Unfortunately, the Browns were unable to keep up with the constant increase of guests to the lodge, even as they continued to improve the lodge and add on. This, in combination with the Wilderness Act still undecided, and many local backpackers protesting for the closure of the lodge, the future of LeConte Lodge seemed desperate. When the Browns ended their time as managers in 1975, they thought that it best to let the lodge revert to its natural state. Jim Huff, the nephew of former owner and manager Jack Huff, partnered with Hugh Ogle to take on the next period of the lodge's history. They began managing in 1976. With the future of LeConte Lodge still unknown, Huff and Ogle changed the way the lodge worked in hopes of reducing the human footprint it created. They started using kerosene for heating, propane for cooking, and helicopter drops to bring supplies to the lodge instead of keeping pack animals on the trail. By 1982, it had been decided that the lodge would be allowed to continue to operate on the conditions that new protections and restrictions would need to be followed. Huff and Ogle doubled their efforts to make this happen. They built new structures, updated the sewer system, and continued using helicopter drops as often as possible. LeConte would still use pack animals to bring some supplies up the mountains, but they would now use llamas due to their soft feet and lower potential to damage the trails. In 1990, Jim Huff and Hugh Ogle's management company would be bought into, and the lodge would begin to change hands. By the time Huff and Ogle had finished playing musical chairs with investors and corporations, LeConte Lodge would be owned by William Stokely III and Tim Line. They were determined to keep the helicopter supply chain active, but looked to change anything else they could. The management group began by updating everything from the sewer system to storage facilities and built many structures in the process. They even built new lodging for employees. In 2004, they began using solar energy to power the lodge. Today, they still manage the lodge, and even though they have erased any leftover communal aspects of lodging on top of the mountain, they do try to preserve and protect the area. LeConte Lodge is typically open from late March to late November. You need to plan your trips in advance, as reservations can be sold out months in advance. LeConte Lodge holds 60 guests per night. There's 7 cabins. There's 3 multi-room lodges. There's no electricity, but there are flush toilets. You can have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and special menus are available if given prior notice. All the units in LeConte Lodge today have kerosene lanterns for light, propane heaters for heat, a wash basin and bucket, linens, a mirror, and even a covered porch with rocking chairs. LeConte Lodge has become a staple of the Smoky Mountain experience over the nearly 100 years it has been in operation. Even though the lodge first operated as a spot for the elites, it was necessary to show off the Smoky Mountains as the natural wonder they are, so they could be protected. Without the hard work of all the managers, employees, and visionaries involved throughout the years, LeConte Lodge would have failed time and time again. While the future of LeConte Lodge did seem to be on shaky ground for a time, it has come back better than ever to serve the people. We must offer unique experiences to people who wouldn't otherwise make the journey to these remote places. It allows us to spread conservation and preservation as the most important pieces of our lives today. We must continue to protect these natural beauties, and LeConte Lodge has proven that we indeed can live in harmony with nature.